Hello, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Sadunik. Tanse, Nitsigason, Elizabeth Sadunik. Um, I am the Indigenous Perspectives Engagement Coach for SunWest School Division, and I'm really happy today to be able to talk with poet and a relative of mine, Francine Merasty, and she's going to share with us a poem that she wrote. And Francine is a lawyer. She's Nihia Wisqueo, so she's a Cree woman, and she is a residential school survivor. And yeah, so hi, Francine.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
Um, Thank you for inviting me to come share my poetry, and I'm happy to be here. I am a lawyer, and I work for the Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation as executive assistant to the chief. So that's my role right now. But as a as an aside, I also do poetry, and I started writing poetry when I was working for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And this was back in 2018. That's when I started writing poetry. And I used it as a way to, like, as a coping mechanism. Yeah. So I'm from Pelican Narrows, and I have a big family. I have um, 6 brothers and 2 sisters, and that was, with my parents there. Between them, they had 11 children, and yeah. So I live in Saskatoon presently at the moment. I just continued to live in Saskatoon, so that's where I spend most of my time. And my book Iskuti Wisku, it's called Iskuti Wisku, just came out in July of this year, so it hasn't been on the market for a long time yet, but I'm hoping to get the word out so that people could read more of the poetry that I wrote. And yeah, so is this kind of like an interview style, so you want to ask questions?
Sure. Yeah. Do you have your
Or
book
did you
there?
want me or did you want me to read the poem first?
Sure. Oh, so that's your book. Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Would you share with us that poem called Homebound, Francine?
Okay, so this one is not in my book. I wrote Homebound when the Kamloops children were found in a mass grave, and it really affected a lot of people. And um, at the time, like, I didn't really want to deal with it or process it because it was just too painful. But, like, it's just something that can't be ignored, and you have to deal with the reality of what happened to, First Nations people and the children that went to residential school. And I kind of wanted to present it in to be a happy poem, even though it's like a really disturbing content, to face this reality. Um, so I wrote Homebound, and I just have to bring it up here because it's not in my book, but it's in my computer here. And I'm just going to read it out. So this one is called Homebound. Today, I finally went home. Everyone in the country knew about it. It put a smile on my face. I had my little dress on, 2 braids down my back. How Kukum did it before I came here. I haven't been this happy for a century. Children's laughter all around me. The sun was bright in the sky. In a moment, my family was there. My mom, my dad, my cookums and mushums, laughing, crying, hugging me. I told them I waited for them I waited for them long, but I was so happy to see them. The wind blew softly, flowers swayed, long grass danced in the distance. They held my hand, one on each side. My spirit was triumphant, and we walked home in the direction of the sun. So that's Homebound. And I wrote that poem to reflect, the children were buried and now they were found and now they're going home to the spirit world, where where they should be. And part of it is also talking about my experience as a residential school survivor, because I was living at a residential school for 10 months out of a year, and it was a very lonely place, as a 7-year old, to not be with your parents or your family. And you can feel that in the poem that I just read, the loneliness of not, having those people around for support and for love.
Yeah.
And so it's a real tragedy, the residential school system. And even some people will say, well, you learned this and that, and it was a good thing, trying to justify that. But even me, I went at a time when it wasn't like so, like I didn't experience a lot of physical abuse or verbal abuse. I know I did verbal abuse, but, just that disconnection from family, from culture, that was wrong. And nothing that happened, positive or however you want to look at it, that happened there, it doesn't justify, um, like it doesn't justify residential schools. I don't think it could ever be justified. It was wrong, plain and simple. So that's how I feel.
Mm, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Francine. Yeah. That's that's very powerful. Yeah. Can
Oh, and one more thing. This is my grandmother.
yeah.
So her name is Jane Merasty, and she went to residential school. So today she's 94 years old. She just celebrated her 94th birthday in August,
Mhm.
and she went to the St. Teresa Residential School in Sturgeon Landing. And she said she was about 11 years old when she went there. She was born in 1927
Okay.
or 28, around that time. So this would have been like 30s,
Mhm.
30s, 40s. So, like residential school has been around. So she's the first generation that went, and then my father went, and then we went. So that's 3 generations of people that went to a residential school. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of people, when they think of residential school, they'll think of people your Cookum's age and they think it's only those people, right? And they don't, maybe realize that it's that second generation and that third generation, people your age, not an elder, like not a really old person, but someone who's middle aged. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I still consider myself young. I'm not middle aged.
I'm sorry. I thought I was middle
Well, we're about the same age. So anyways, yeah, so I went to the Prince Albert Indian Residential School. They called it the Prince Albert Indian Education Center the time I was there. and this was in 1987, 88, and 89. So I was 7 years old, and then I went home um, uh, at 9 years old. So 10 years old, I went to the res school in Pelican, but the PA residential school closed finally in 19, I believe 96 or 97. So
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't even long ago. That's
No.
like 25 years ago. And that was here in Saskatchewan. That's the last residential school that was closed in
Yeah.
Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that kind of helps put into perspective because when people think about the effects of residential school, it's really still effects of on people who are our contemporaries that are our peers. It's not
Oh,
only effects from those previous generations, right?
that's exactly right. Like my son is the first person that didn't attend residential school,
Mm-hmm.
and I could see the intergenerational effects of the residential school, like when I see when I was growing up, my father wasn't really an affectionate person. Like he didn't um I guess give like hugs and things like that,
Yeah.
and my grandmother was like that as well. I don't know if it's like a generational thing or I don't know, but I didn't see a lot of like physical affection from that. And but my mother, who didn't attend residential school, like she was more in Cree they call it a gisiwatsuin. She had that like love and like something you can feel from a person. So she
A
had
warm.
that, yeah, a warmth.
Yeah.
Whereas the people that went to residential school, it's like something happened to them that I don't know where that part of them went, but they didn't show it. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
show a lot of affection. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, it's compounded too. Like she went, my dad went, and I went. So, I don't really want to get into like the intergenerational effects because like they're shameful, like it's not something I really want to talk about publicly, but I could say, yeah, there's effects there, that there's places, part of me that needs healing from not only the intergenerational effects but from my own experience as well. Yeah. So it's just a reality, that I have to live with. But it's not all like, like I'm a happy person. But I do recognize, there's if I didn't go to residential school and if residential school didn't happen, like we would be so completely different people. Yeah.
Do you, in your poetry, do you find that you write a lot about residential school, or do you find you write more about other things like your family or culture, or what do you think comes out the most in your poems?
Um, So when I was working for missing and murdered women, I dealt with a lot of trauma. I was a statement taker, and as a statement taker, we would be sitting in hotel rooms and we would have a camcorder and a recorder, an audio recorder, and I would have the person sit in there in front of the camera and I would be asking them questions about their missing or murdered family member. So it was quite traumatic work. There was a few times where I thought I would break down, like right in there, right while I was doing the interview. And also my first interview, which took 4 hours in Winnipeg, like really affected me. Like I could literally feel like a pain, like in my heart area, and
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get it out until we had debriefing later. And then when I had the debriefing, I felt better. But this was during the time when it was a very cold winter, and I didn't have the time to go and get therapy or to talk to a therapist to deal with this trauma that I'm listening to, right?
Yeah.
And so I started writing poetry as a way to occupy my mind. And when I look back at the stuff that I was writing, it was about my mother, my childhood, my grandmother, things we did as children. And these were times like happy times,
Mm-hmm.
and they were healing times. And I do write about contemporary issues that we as First Nations people deal with, like the justice system. Well, because I'm a lawyer, right? So I write about that. I write about missing and murdered women, residential schools, and also I talk about my faith, like as a Christian, as a Catholic person. And so there's like a little bit of everything in there. It's really quite like it's not just about one area, or it's just a variety of things, of experiences that I've had in my life. And I find it more of a healing book than anything else. Like it's not really like the poetry you find in there is not, it's not really like in an angry voice or anything, but I'm just telling you how it is for First Nations people when I talk about our social issues, but also I talk about our strengths, like our connection with the land, our language, our kinship ties, like really positive things about being a First Nations person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Um, so one thing I wanted to ask you was the title of your book there. It's Iskoteo Isqueo, Poems of a Northern Res Girl. So can you explain for maybe people who don't speak Cree what that means?
So Iskutio means fire and Osquiu means woman. So it's fire woman. But I wanted it to be fiery woman because there's a poem in here that's called Fiery Woman, and it's actually about my mother. And the closest translation in Cree I could come was Iskutio, fire, right? So, and I think it worked out like Iskutio Iskuil. Um, like it makes sense, if I tried to put fiery woman in there, I don't think it would have flowed. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I picked Iskutio Iskuil. And I could read that poem for you. The 60, it kind of alludes to the 60s scoop, because this was the time when children were being taken away from their parents, I mean their mothers, even right at the hospital, as like when they were finished having their babies, the
Mm-hmm.
government would come right to the hospital and make women sign away the child, like to put them in adoption or foster care or whatever. That was such a deliberate attempt to take these children away from their culture, like
Yeah.
what they've been doing with residential schools. So it's like a continuation with a child welfare system. And, in my book, there's this is a kind of like a resistance poem too. And there's two poems like that. One is about residential school. Before I talked about my mom didn't attend residential school. Um, the authorities did come to the house and they told my grandfather, if your kids don't go to residential school, you're not going to get your family allowance. And my grandfather said, that's okay. I can take care of my own children. And he was a big man, like he was um, tall and big. And I guess, they didn't have authorities that way at that time. And so they couldn't force him to take his kids, right? So then, whenever the time came for the residential schools, he would take his children to account so they wouldn't have to deal with that every year. And that's how um, I retained my Cree language, Ninidawan. Well, yes, Ninidawan, because my mom kept her language because she didn't go to the residential school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this one called Fiery Woman, and it's about my mother. So it goes, you sly fox, you coming here with your fancy heels and smart suit. Little do you know that 1,000 fires burn within me, a fiery blaze, trying to make me sign those papers that would rip away the seed that I nurtured within me for months. I am not broken. I withstand your daily assaults. I'm too young, too stupid, too savage. Your words turn to ashes beneath me. They fall. I've met you face to face, and I still stand. So my mother was 16 years old. 15, 15, I think she was 15 years old when she had my brother. And her parents and my dad weren't at the hospital for a few days after she gave birth. And several times a day for 3 days, this woman from the provincial government tried to make her sign Dwight away, like my brother.
Yeah.
And she resisted, even though she was only a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. No, I can feel that strength come through that poem. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful honor to your mom, that poem.
Yeah. So that's all these poems are in here. So it's only 17.95. Just kidding.
uh, okay. So, we thank you for sharing your poetry with us and your stories and your honesty. We really appreciate it. Um, when I say we, I mean our students and our staff at Sun West School Division. We really appreciate it. if you had one thing to kind of, maybe not one thing, maybe there's a couple of things, I don't know, but what do you think what's one way that students and parents and teachers might take action for a reconciliation?
Well, there is the calls to action, the TRC report.
Mm-hmm.
And I think implementing those TRC calls to action, they're meant to be implemented, right? So that residential school doesn't happen again. So I think even being aware of this report and reading what is in there, I think, especially for school children, they'll know what happened and how they can help to fix this. And if they know and read these calls to action, and whenever they have the chance, like if they're going to be sitting in government as leaders one day, they'll know what to do. So get to know the calls to action. And I actually do have a poem called Reconciliation, and I could share that with you. I usually share that with non-Indigenous people because it's a powerful poem on reconciliation.
Sure, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so it's on page 37 of my book. I'm just doing little, I'm just kidding. I'm not really trying to promote or sell it, but I'm fooling around. Okay, so this one is called Reconciliation. Settler colonialism is resistant to change, it's stubborn, but a new vision is being created of reconciliation. I see baby steps. Hope is born in my heart, even as I experience discrimination and violence. In the future, when I'm gone, if my forgiveness is needed for all the injustices I've experienced to make reconciliation a reality, I give it freely. I forgive. So that's reconciliation.
Wow. Thank you, Francine.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Yeah. It's very powerful.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to say thank you for your time. Gananaskamutin.
Yinigi, yeah.
Okay. And yeah, we will, I hope see you again soon.